Brums here, coming to you live from Surprise in Arizona. Hope you're having a super fantastic, sparkling day. Welcome to Before the Dirt Nap podcast number 1926. Fun Fact Friday Genealogy Tips. Whew, that was a mouthful. So we're on Friday. We've got finish up Friday, so you can also what tasks have you got off your plate for this week. I got a whole bunch of stuff done this week that I wasn't expecting to get done, which was really cool. Then I got some other stuff done that I should have gotten done but didn't. Yeah. So here we are on Friday. I totally forgot last night to mention that we've got Networking Riches coming up in a couple of weeks on November 20th to the 21st. It's a Wednesday, Thursday. The first day goes from 8 a.m. Pacific time to 3 p.m. Pacific time. And then the next day is shorter. It's 8 a.m. to around 1 p.m. Pacific time. So if you want to come as my guest, please scan the QR code that's up here in the top corner, and that will take you straight to the registration page. So come along, join us. It's a lot of fun. It's a great time, and there's a whole bunch of new stuff that you're going to learn. It's just really cool. I don't really want to give stuff away. But anyway, we're here to talk about Fun Facts Friday Genealogy Tips. Or I think that's what I called it. Hang on. Fun Facts Friday. Yeah. What did I call it? Yeah, Fun Facts Friday. That's a mouthful. I need to shorten that down next time. Anyway, so what are some Fun Facts Friday ideas that we can have a look at? Well, did you know that genealogy is one of the world's most popular hobbies? It's often ranked right behind gardening and cooking, with millions of people diving into their family history each year. When people ask me what I do, and I let them know that I'm a genealogist, depending on what function I'm at, whether I'm doing got my marketing hat on or whether I've got my genealogy hat on, depending on the audience as to which one I do, then that's the one that I go with. But when they find out that I'm a genealogist, you would be surprised at how many people will turn around and say things like, oh my gosh, I was researching my genealogy and I discovered blah, 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 blah. Or, oh, I've always wanted to research my genealogy, but I've got no idea where to start. Those are the two, they're either telling you a story about their family history, or they'll turn around and say, we haven't had time to start yet. We don't know where to start. So those are the three things that I find most of the time when I meet people. Probably about 95% of the time when I meet people and let them know that I'm and they find out I'm a genealogist, then that's when I start getting those family stories. I start getting things like, I've always wanted to research my family tree. I just don't have the time for it. I've always wanted to research. I just don't know where to start. The Guinness World Record for the largest family tree goes to Confucius, with over 2 million descendants documented across 80 generations. I wonder how long that took to research. I mean, just the number of 2 million descendants. And I'm like looking at my tree thinking it's big, and it's only got like somewhere around 9,000 people in it. And how many generations does that go across? 7, I think. I think seven generations back I go. I think I go back 7. Might be 8. But yeah, 80 generations. That's a lot with 2 million people, with 2 million descendants. Whew. That's got to be over several years and stuff that they've done that research for that, unless they've got a really big team that's been in there and all of that. Most family names originated from jobs, locations, or physical traits. Names like Baker, Hill, and Short come from people's occupations, where they lived, or physical characteristics. So just think about that. If you've got a name, and your name may have been we talked about this a couple of nights ago, your name may have actually originated from a different country under a different language. And what the version of it today is the English version of what your name is. So you might have had an Italian name or a German name or a French name, and now it's been translated into English somewhere along the way. So you now have an English sounding name. So check out that to see what it was. Ellis Island never changed people's names. Contrary to the popular myth, names were never changed at Ellis Island. Names were recorded as they appeared on immigration documents, though some immigrants voluntarily changed them later. So there's that thing with that. People keep going, oh, they got changed to Ellis Island. Sometimes, and I have heard this, and I have also seeing the evidence of it that they asked if they could actually record a new name. And when they came into Ellis Island, and there was the rare occasion where I have seen where that was done. Cousin marriages were once common in many parts of the world, especially among royalty and small communities. Marriages between cousins were encouraged to keep the wealth and status within the family. Yeah, you can go back through this. Now, I remember, oh God, this is relying on my memory. So back in the 80s, in the early 80s, I think it was 81 when they got married, when Prince Charles and Lady Diana got married, I remember being in New Zealand and reading one of the magazines, their genealogies. They had it published in one of the New Zealand magazines there, and they said that Lady Diana Spencer actually had more royal blood in her than what Prince Charles had. And I thought, isn't that cool that they can figure that? And this is before DNA testing and everything else. But because of her bloodlines and her genealogy and stuff, apparently, if I remember the article correctly, is that she had more royal blood in her than he did. I thought, cousins getting married. Yes, keeping the wealth and the status within the family. Absolutely. The 72-year rule for the U.S. Census records. By law, census records are sealed for 72 years for privacy reasons. This is why the 1950 census is the latest publicly available, and it was released in 2022. The next one will not be released. The 1961 will not be released until 2032. So there you go. That's the reasoning behind that. I think England is 100 years. I have a feeling they're longer. I have a feeling. Ancestors' handwriting can reveal personality traits. Studying handwriting, known as graphology, that's GRAPHOLOGY, can sometimes give clues to personality, though it's more art than science. Some people, I have to tell you, when you're going through records and you're seeing all the handwritten records from different eras and things, some of them have the most gorgeous penmanship, and some of them are like chicken scratch. And then there's those ones that are in between, which you can the chicken scratch ones are a bit more of a challenge to read. The ones that have the beautiful penmanship can be a challenge at times, especially if you don't know cursive. And then those that are in between, you have more of a chance reading the beautifully written ones than you do the chicken scratch. And the ones in between, you've got a high chance of reading those more than you have the chicken scratch. But it's actually quite interesting to see that when you're looking at it from different eras, different years, different time periods and things, how the handwriting changes. I always remember what my grandparents' handwriting looked like, and then seeing my mother-in-law's writing and thinking they're kind of similar. And even though they're two different countries, my grandparents were in New Zealand, she was here in the States, they had a very similar writing style based on the period in which they were born. So I thought that was interesting. So this one here about studying handwriting to reveal personality traits, I'm thinking that might be something really cool just to look into, and it may even give me clues on how to read it better, because some of that writing can be very tricky to read, and you've got to be and a lot of the times you've got to kind of like blow up the image of it to actually see the handwriting, and then you kind of trace it, so it gives you an idea of the letters that are written when you try and trace it, or you have a pen and paper here and you try and copy, visually seeing it and following the curves and the loops and all of that with your pen on paper, and then looking down to see what you've actually written. That's one way to do that. The oldest human family tree found in 2021 was by archaeologists in England, mapped a family from 5,700 years ago, making it one of the oldest documented family trees. I'm just sort of like, I got to go look that up and read more information about that. You're likely related to royalty. Many genealogists find distant connections to European royalty, as the royal families were meticulously documented and intermarried across generations. Yes, they actually had the royal families actually have their own genealogists. I was talking with a friend of mine who went to visit. I think it was Rockefellers. It was one of those older, wealthier American families that she went to visit, and she says, and she says, you need to get a job with them. I'm like, why? She says they have a full-time genealogist, and this way they track everybody that is living. They track all the deaths, the births, and everybody that's living. So if somebody comes and says, this is, I'm related to the Rockefellers, this is, this is my child, I had this out of wedlock, I had an affair with blah, 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 blah. They can go in and they can see, they've got all the details there and all that sort of stuff. So, there are families like the Royals and that have full-time genealogists on staff to track all the births, deaths, and marriages within the family, and not just the direct line to the royal family, but also those side branches too, going into the cousins and there's a lot of people that have to keep track of. Some DNA tests, this is really cool, can trace ancient origins. Advanced DNA tests can identify the haplogroups that trace your genetic origins back tens of thousands of years, connecting you to ancient tribes and populations. If you do, the one that I know that does the haplogroup is Family Tree DNA. If you go into there, they've got the haplogroup, and you can click on it's a letter, and so I click on the letter to find out. I come from somewhere in Central Africa, is where my haplogroup originates from, which is kind of interesting when you have a look at it when it goes back thousands of years, because the ones that they used the Y chromosome for the men and the mitochondrial for the women, the X chromosome, the mitochondrial for the woman, both of those very rarely change over time because that is just passed directly. The mitochondrial is passed from mother to child. So the son will have some, but the sons cannot pass it on. So the daughters can. So that one's only passed down through the woman, even though it can go to both male and female. It is actually passed from female to female to female. And that one very rarely changes. And that's the one that they use for the haplogroups for the women. And they use the Y DNA on the men because there is very little that has changed over time. Because those ones don't get mixed up with all the other DNA, and that's in there. Libraries and archives store rare gems. Now, we have talked about this over this past week about how going into libraries and archives where you might find manuscripts and diaries and letters that aren't digitized, that you can find from diaries, also known as journals, that you can find from different families and that sort of thing as well. You never know what you will find in the libraries or in archives because they will have everything documented that they have. They just may not have it digitized. So visiting in person, you might be interesting to find out what little tidbits you could find about that family. Your DNA is 99.9% identical to everyone else's. Only a tiny fraction of our DNA makes us unique, which is why even small genetic similarities can connect you to long-lost relatives. Interesting. Yes. So have a look at that. That's, the DNA thing that they're doing and the tests that they can run. The first one I did was 23andMe. No, Family Tree DNA was the first one I did. Then I did 23andMe, and then I did Ancestry. And people go, why did you do all three? Because different people do different DNA tests based on what it is they want to test for. The Family Tree DNA does the Y chromosome, the X chromosome, and the mitochondrial chromosome, as well as the autosomal. The autosomal is the one that that they use for your ethnicities. So you've got those on that one, and also I want to find out what haplogroup I belong to, and also too I have people who I'm related to through the DNA that haven't done the other two. So it gives me a broader range, a broader database range that I can find more people that I'm related to via DNA by doing 3 different tests. Plus, as a genealogist, or a potential genealogist, I wanted to know how accurate these tests were. Were they the same? Did they give me the same records? Did they give me the same ethnicities? Did they give me differences? There was a 1 to 2% difference in the ethnicities when they did all the updates. In fact, I've got to go back in because I know Ancestry just did a massive update, which I've already had a look at on the ethnicities. So now I've got to go back to the other two and see if they've done a big database update as well. But I found different relatives on different through different DNA tests. And then what I do on Ancestry, you can actually connect somebody to your tree. And when you do the DNA matches, if you find out, yes, that person is related to me, this is how they're related to me, you can actually connect them to your tree. And And that way you know that you've got a DNA match. Now, there's some that I have connected to I've done a tree connection on, who had done 23andMe or had done family tree DNA. But what I was able to do is that in the comments for that connection, I would put DNA match found through 23andMe or family tree DNA. So I've got it there that, yeah, I didn't match them on Ancestry, but I have matched them somewhere else. And this way, when I'm looking at my tree, there's these little symbols that they put up for those that you actually have a DNA connection with. Surname spelling wasn't standardized, can't talk today, until the 19th century. Before then, names could be spelled differently by various record keepers, making research challenging but interesting. Yeah, they had to start like paying attention and asking how names were spelt, and but even still, they may have had a standardized way of writing down last names and things, but there's still slip-ups that were made. Some of the slip-ups were not made by the person recording. It was made by the person transcribing. So another reason for learning how to read the handwriting. Handwriting analysis can take you back in time. Old documents often show cursive styles unique to different centuries. Yes, I can attest to that. Decoding these styles is like stepping back in time. Like I said, my grandparents' handwriting and my mother-in-law's handwriting was a very similar style. Even looking at my mum's writing, it was different from her parents' writing. But other people that are around the same age as my mum, I've noticed that their handwriting is similar to hers. And she's in New Zealand. These are people in the States. Look and go, well, that looks like my mum's writing. Or when I looked at my mother-in-law's writing, I'm like, well, that looks like the way my grandparents would write. So based on the time period, you can get different styles of writing. I mean, when they used to use the quills, there was a certain way you had to write with the quills to get the ink onto the paper. And it wasn't just a fine, just a dot tip at the end, like pens are that we use today. It had a flat head, a flat piece on it. So based on how you held the quill as to how the writing would come out. Years later, that was, I don't think, do I have one sitting here somewhere? I know I have them. I'm just not sure if I have one sitting here. Let me see. Oh, no, I know exactly where it is. But there is ink pen. If you have a look at an ink pen, and this is the one that actually has the cartridges in it, where the ink flows out. You can see the different ways just by the way you hold the pen. If you look at a calligraphy set, those calligraphy sets came from different, the nibs came from different time periods or when they used to write different ways. And depending on how you hold the nib on the paper, that was the point I was trying to think of. How you hold the nib on the paper determines how the letters are formed. Some of them were very artsy and beautiful works of art for the initial first letter. And then they'd have all this beautiful script art. I mean, some of the handwriting over the time has been absolutely gorgeous. Love looking at that. And finally, your family's story is part of larger historical events. Discovering your ancestors' participation in events like wars, migrations, societal changes links your family to world history in a meaningful way. This is why I am so, my hair's falling down. This is why I am so for people telling their story. I don't care if you sit down and you record it on a video. I don't care if you pick up one of these or your phone and audio record on it. I don't care if you sit down and write it out longhand or type it. Just tell your story. And it doesn't have to be in chronological order. You can just sit there and, pull out a journal, open up and just start writing. Some event comes into mind, pull out a journal, pull out a recorder, flip a camera on, and just record that story that you just remember. Because here's the really cool part is that as you're recording that story, it will remind you of another one. And so then you can jot that down to either tell later or you can carry on and tell that story. So you can have these little snippets over time. And if you start with, hey, I remember when I was about 7 years old, blah, 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 blah. Or I remember I was about 13 and this event happened. Or I remember when I was where I was on 9/11 in 2001, and talk about your experiences there. Think of different times and what historical events have happened during your lifetime, and start telling the stories about it. Start recording what you remember about those times, those stories, those events that happened. What was your role in those? Did you participate in any way? Were you caught up in the event? When a hurricane came through, were you living in the area? How did that affect where you lived? Was your house wiped out? Was your house flooded? Was your house completely untouched? What was the neighborhood like? Think of all these different events that have happened over time. What was your first day of school like? I went to 9 different schools during my lifetime. My mum didn't believe me until I rattled them all off. She was upset because my niece, who was 6 or 7 at the time, what was she? Yeah, you might have been 7 or somewhere in there. She was on like her 5th school, and my mum was horrified. She was on her 5th school. I go, Mum, you do realize I went to 9 different schools, don't you? She's like, you did not. So I rattled off the name. She goes, oh, what horrible parents you had. But yeah, she didn't realize that I had been to so many schools. I went to 6 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, or intermediate middle schools, and 1 high school. And then years later, I went to community college, and I got 3 associate degrees at once. So that was kind of cool. So, that'll be school number 10. If you really want to count higher education, that was school number 10. And since then, I've done been to different online colleges and done different classes and all of that as well. So that number's probably higher. But during my 13 years of school life, I went to 9 different schools. In New Zealand, we start school at the age of 5 and you finish when you're 18. But in that time, I went to kindergartens before that. You start kindergarten when you're like 2 or 3. There's morning kindy, there's afternoon kindy, and when you're 4, you then go to all-day kindy. Kindergarten kindy, yeah. So anyway, just think of things that times that when you moved. Like I moved a lot. Do I remember the layouts of houses? Some of them I actually do. I can actually draw you floor plans of the house that we lived in from the age of 4 all the way through to the last one that I lived in with my parents. I can draw the floor plans for every single one of those. The ones prior to, like the house I was born in, no clue. The 2 houses we lived in between those 2 and the one that I actually started school at, couldn't tell you about them. But the other ones, I can draw you all the floor plans for those. So, and that was Penrua, Invercargill, Porirua, Fielding, Waitara, Tawa. 6 different houses. So I can draw them all. I can draw the floor plans for you. Actually, Tawa was 2 different places. There was the one they rented for a bit until they bought a house. But I can draw you both floor plans for both of those too. So I can even draw you for the floor plans for the places that I lived in between while I was in the Air Force and stuff as well. Could probably do a pretty good rendition of what was where on the base as well for the stuff that I had to do anyway. But with that, so think about all these different things that all these different experiences you have had over life, and start talking about the experiences that you have. What was my years in the Royal New Zealand Air Force like? Would I go back and do it again? I keep thinking it'd be fun to go back and do it again, and I'm just like, nah, been there, done that, don't need to repeat it, thank you. It was a lot of fun when I was in there. There was, as a very naive 17-year-old when I joined the Royal New Zealand Air Force, I was sort of like, and that was 40 years ago this year, back in May. May 1st of 1984 is when I joined the Royal New Zealand Air Force. And I still remember that bus trip down to Wellington, being met at the railway station, which is where the bus depot was, by somebody in the Air Force who was a driver, getting in the van, then getting and picking up some other people there as well. There was a guy we picked up in Wanganui who was going on the same recruit course that I was, getting in the van, driving all the way out to Shelley Bay, getting the guys dropped off there, and then having us women driven around to Worcester Bay, which is where the women's barracks were. That was a pretty cool experience, and I got to meet Leanne and Maria there, and got angels visiting us again, and then the trip being picked up the next morning and taken to Wellington Airport. And on one side of Wellington Airport was the commercial side, where they had the airport, and on the other side of the airport there was basically a hangar that was the Royal New Zealand Air Force, and they used the Wellington Airport runway, and they had their own building for all of their for the aircraft for landing and taxiing and all that, and loading and all that sort of stuff. And we got to fly in an Andover, and I'd never flown in an Andover before, and all the seats faced the back of the plane. So we loaded up on the rear ramp and got to sit in seats facing the tail of the plane, which was a really cool way to fly. And I tell you, when they came into land and all of that, taking off and landing was a very different experience from when you're facing the front of an aircraft. Yeah, it was pretty cool. I still remember that flight. And then we got off the plane and we're standing at Woodburn at the Air Force Base there. Now, Woodburn Air Force Base, also on one part of it, has the Blenheim Airport. And so it's the places where we kind of shared the land and all that. But it was actually run and operated by the Air Force, and Blenheim had the use of it as a commercial airport as well. And we were all standing around there, hands in our pockets, and we hear this great big, deep, loud voice screaming at us, "Get your hands out of your pockets and stand to attention!" And we're sort of like, what the hell is that? So there's lots of different stories I can tell you about different experiences that I've done and things I have done and places I have been and visited and stuff. I've got a lot of stories there, and I'm trying to get them all down so that future generations can learn about what an experience, what was it like being in the military in New Zealand in the 80s? Moving from one country to another, what was that experience like? Was it a culture shock? Actually, surprisingly, it wasn't very much of a culture shock. Yeah, although things over here are very large and very big. So the States is a very big country. And sometimes you don't appreciate just how big this country is until you're driving from the East Coast to the West Coast. We had there in the Yukon with a U-Haul trailer on the back and a dog in the back of the vehicle, and then behind the netting in the back of the Yukon, because we had the seats all down flat, so Gus had room to move around and lay down all that. Then at the back we had a net that went across the back, which you're supposed to put stuff in, and in there we had the temperature sensitive stuff because it was June when we were driving and it was very hot outside. And so we had things like our computer bags in there with our laptops in those bags, and any other temperature sensitive stuff was also in that back area between the door and the netting, and that way it wasn't bugging Gus, and we had Gus had the run of the place. We didn't have stuff flying around in the back, but we left on the 12th of June and arrived in LA on the 16th of June in 2010. And people go, well, how do you remember the dates so well? And I'm sort of like, because that's how long it took. When you do something like genealogy, you're always involved with dates, and they just stick. And people go, how do you do that? And I says, well, I'm a genealogist, so dates just stick in my brain for different things. And I said, how do you remember? I said to a chef, they asked me that question. I says, how do you remember recipes? Well, I'm using them all the time. I said, exactly. I'm using dates all the time. Different people, based on their profession and stuff, you have a recall on something that is related to what it is that you do very, very well. I remember dates very, very well because it's what I do. I've got people who are chefs who can go into the kitchen and they can whip up a whole meal and not even look at a recipe. Me, I can kind of do that for the basic stuff, but if I get, I'll put the recipe book over here. I gotta just to give me an idea of what I'm doing. Yes, an idea of what I'm doing, because there's a lot of times that I'll just take the basic recipe and then I go into the kitchen and experiment. As far as I'm concerned, a recipe is a foundation on how to get something done. When it comes to baking, though, I'm not as experimental as I am with cooking. So cooking is, cooking meals and stuff like that. Baking is your breads, your pastries, your cakes, your cookies, all of that sort of stuff. That I'm not so much experimental with, but give me just a cooking recipe to cook for a meal or something, I will go and alter the crap out of that thing just to try it out. Are they all edible? No. Do they taste better than expected? Sometimes. Brad's thing was, I say, how do you like this? Uh-huh. Or I say, it's good. And I go, is it good that you want it again? Please make it again tomorrow night. Is it good that you wouldn't mind it once in a while? Or is it good that this one time is fine, just don't make it again? I had to interpret the good. So I had to ask him. And he said, it's good. Or if he just went, uh-huh, I then had to go through the same thing as, uh-huh, yeah, this is really good. Can we get it again tomorrow night? Uh-huh, can we have it once in a while? Or, uh-huh, that's fine. Just don't make it again. So we had to interpret. We had conversations about this. It was, I miss those conversations. I miss my husband sitting there going, when I put something on his plate, just looking at it and going, I'd go, trust me, it tastes better than it looks. Because sometimes it didn't look very appetizing and all that, but boy, did it have a good flavor to it. And some of them just tasted as bad as they looked. But unless you experiment, you don't know. So talk about, if you're somebody that gets in the kitchen and experiments, talk about it. I know my middle stepson was very upset with me because we had this really good mac and cheese one night. He goes, oh, this is so good. Can you give me the recipe? And I was like, I can give you the basic recipe and then you can play and figure it out. And he's like, why don't you write these things down? I said, well, how do you write a dash of this and a pinch of that and a dollop of this? And I said, because I never make mac and cheese the same way twice. I have, to the best of my recollection, I have never made it the same way twice. And one year I made a completely gluten-free, dairy-free mac and cheese. And my youngest stepson, who was the pickiest of eaters, had 3 helpings of it before we told him that there was no dairy in there, and there was the cheese wasn't real cheese. There was no milk in it, no butter in there for the roux, because I always made a white sauce and then I just threw cheese in there. But yeah, and that there was no real pasta. Yes, there was pasta in there, but it was gluten free, and he had no clue. He was on his 3rd helping before we told him that it was dairy free and gluten free. The look on his face was priceless. But anyway, with that, I'm out of here. Go out, have a super fantastic sparkling evening. Find some fun facts that are in, what are some of the fun facts that are in your tree? Some of the funny stories and everything else. Do you have? Oh, here's another way you can do this for fun from when you're researching. Look, when you're looking at the occupations of your ancestors, what kind of occupations did they have? Were they a clown in a circus? Did they entertain in the dance halls? Did they have some really weird job? Did they have some job that was kind of fun and entertaining? Were they a stand-up comedian? You never know. You never know what you have in your relatives' past unless you go and look and find out, what they did for a job. They may have been written up in a paper for some reason. Maybe they got taken to court for some stupid thing. Yes. I actually found a really cool story the other day. No, a couple of months ago, I found a really cool story that was in a newspaper, and I just could not stop laughing. I should have actually taken a copy of it, but it wasn't related to anything I was looking in the tree. It just happened to be there because it happened to have this person's name in there, but it wasn't that person. But it was a very entertaining story to read. And had I been thinking about it, I should have printed it off so I could have shared it with you guys. But anyway, with that, we're out of here. Go out, have a super fantastic sparkling evening. If you want to join us at Networking Riches on November 20th and 21st, just click scan the QR code up here, and you'll be able to come free as my guest. So we will catch you guys back here tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a super fantastic sparkling evening. He konera.